You're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. You know, today we have an interesting show for you. Today we have a show it's going to connect with your heart, it's going to connect with your mind, it's going to connect with probably some memories of your childhood, it's going to connect with life and the way that we see things, it's going to connect with, it's going to talk about respect, we're going to be talking about kindness, connecting with other people, connecting with animals, connecting with our earth, and you know, I find that a lot of times in life, you know, being able to read a compelling book that connects with your heart and soul is amazing. And I've also found that a lot of times we as adults have a tendency of reading books that, some of them connect with us, some of them don't really add to our quality of life. And some of the books that I have really connected with more so throughout my whole life, if I really examine it quite honestly, are books that are more even conceptually considered young adult books. And I find that interesting because I feel that, you know, when I look back at the books that I've read and the ones that really touched me, I find that there is no age limit. There is no age advisory. And, you know, that's why I think today's show is really going to connect with you because, you know, when we look at why we're here and we look at, you know, personal growth and we look at mutual respect and we think about kindness and we think about the importance of doing what's right and not the importance of doing what's right just because of the fact that, if we don't, we're going to get hurt. If we don't, we're going to have, you know, all kinds of problems that are going to come our way and we're going to be overwhelmed with that. It's more about doing it because we realize that's what we truly are. That is our identity. That is who we are and that is what we do. And I think that when we get closer and closer to our authentic identity of who we are, we choose to do the highest good all the time, choose to do the highest good when all concerned. But there's sometimes where we make not so good choices. There's sometimes where we make choices that we look back at and we wish we hadn't. Maybe anger got in the way. Maybe resentment got in the way. Maybe our ego got in the way. Whatever it was, we made a choice and we paid for it. We paid for that choice. And it was painful and it was overwhelming, but somehow or not, getting back on path, doing the right thing, refocusing our life, jumping through a few hoops, personal hoops and other hoops that we had to deal with, we actually came out ahead and we learned from that. And that's what's so powerful. And so joining me today, first of all, later on in the hour, we got Dan Nelson. Dan is our resident genealogist, our resident historian, Dan Nelson, and he's got a really great story for us today that goes along with what we're talking about. But in the meantime, I have a guest that's coming here live. Dr. Anthony Manna is an award-winning children's author. He's a retired professor of children's and adult literature. He's really just one of the pioneers of literacy education and drama from Kent State University. And his amazing experiences, his passion as award-winning educator for 50 years has inspired kids and teens around the world to be more confident, to be more skilled, and to be happily more motivated. He's taught in schools and universities around the world, in Turkey and Greece and Albania, as well as the United States. And it's really interesting because we're going to talk with him today about his newest released book, Loukas and the Game of Chance. And it's really awesome because it's kind of a reimagined Greek folklore and Greek folktale that illuminated with, it's a powerful tale of destiny. It's a powerful tale of doing the right thing. And it's a powerful tale of making mistakes and still coming out somewhat ahead. And this is going to be really powerful today, so I hope everybody's checking out the show. We're going to have a great show today. Dr. Manna, Anthony, great to have you live on Live Your True Life Perspectives. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Ashley. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you.
I'm just glad to have you on, and we've had some conversations, and you and I really are connected in our thoughts and concepts about life. And you know, it was interesting. I read the whole book, so I actually finished the book. Last night. And first off, you know, when I think about this book, what guided you to create the character of Loukas? What was that about? Tell me a little bit more about that backstory.
Well, Loukas, I wanted a character, a young character. He starts off as a young character who is in a very poor family on an island in the Aegean Sea. They're fisher folk, and I wanted to find out about him. I wanted him to lead me into his life and to show me the way to what he is going to do to try to make a better life for his family, for himself, and it just happens because of destiny to come upon this magical snake. And it so happens that Loukas is a flute player, learned that skill from his father and mother, and he's quite a master at it. And the snake comes to the seawall, and the snake loves Lukas's music, dances to it each time, and every single time he leaves behind not one, not two, but 3 gold coins. And of course the family becomes quite wealthy because Loukas plays for this character a lot. Loukas grows up for me. He grew up for me, and he becomes a young adult, and has a family, and makes a terrible mistake, a game of chance, and makes a terrible mistake, and because of greed or pride or whatever got into his head, I don't know. I watched him and I thought, Loukas, you're headed for a bad place. And he loses everything. And at that point, takes off. Because he knows from legends on the island that you can find destiny. And you can beg destiny. I made Destiny a female character. You can make destiny, you can ask destiny to pardon you and help you retrieve your ruined life. And so Loukas was, for me, a kind of metaphor for any of us who, in our lifetime, make mistakes, fail, and experience tough times, and then either have to beg for it or look for it or go down deep inside ourselves to find the courage that we need. I mean, he screams out on the path when he loses everything. He screams out on the path before God, the saints, and the sacred spirits that rule the earth. I vow to free my family from the curse my madness has inflicted on us all. And at that point, he resolves to take off and see if he can bade Destiny, her son the sun, and her daughter Luna the moon to pardon him and help him bring back his life, his wealth, his life, his family, everything that he's lost. He's bereft. Will he make it? Will they grant him to reverse his misfortune and restore his honor and win back all that he loves and treasures? Well, that's what you find out when you read the book.
You know, Anthony, I think it's interesting. I think that, obviously to make mistakes is human. To let ego or greed or pride or resentment or anger get in the way of our clarity, unfortunately, is human. And I find it interesting how, the character Loukas has that happen, in a split second, basically his entire life changes. And this definitely really replicates itself from the human condition.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's like when people say to me at my age, they say, one false move in that bathtub, and you are going to be sorry. And I'm thinking that's the way life is. I mean, sometimes we just don't know. We don't see it coming. Now the thing is, when he was at that card game, the merchant who started the card game was also a person who had been maligning Loukas and telling people lies about his character. And so there was also that wrapped up in that relationship, which to me is very important because, I mean, one of the things that I talk to kids about that when they ask me about where that merchant came from, I tell them, well, there are people who live badly and in disruption and deception and even hatred. Now, what are we going to do about that? What did Loukas do? And then they work with me on that. The kids want to talk to me about that. What choices we make when we're in a tight situation, and they know that because they're in the days when they were still playing with other kids. They knew that there were bullies and that there were people they wanted to stay away from, and sometimes they didn't.
That's so true. And, things can get the best of us. And yes, especially in that situation, trying to prove value, I find that many of us get into a problem, whether it's buying things to prove our value, or it's showing off, or it's trying to prove whatever, because we haven't really found that within. We haven't tackled those issues within, and we let some of the outside world dictate that, and then we find ourselves over-explaining or fighting and ending up in a situation like that.
Absolutely. And we take off in those directions, and I just think that it's a matter of waking up to where we are, and sometimes it's very difficult.
I'm asking you too, what, when you think about that, I mean, as an adult, I would consider myself a young adult, I think young at heart, what I'm saying? As kids, though, in kind of the teenagers, what do you hope that they gain out of reading this book and out of Lucas's story?
Well, I think, what I'll do, I'll zero in right there to Lucas's relationship with the snake, with Lambros. And I like stopping when I'm talking to teens, tweens, whatever, and say, let's look at that relationship. And we immediately look at the trust and the loyalty and the commitment. It's heartwarming. It's very heartwarming. It moves me that Lambros is so thankful for, this mysterious magical snake, is so thankful for this music, and that the fact that music is the bridge, that an art is the bridge and the pleasure in this relationship. So there's one aspect of that. The other is, may we survive, when we make mistakes, when we get into tough times, can we find the courage and the stamina to wake up, shake ourselves a little bit, and say, how are we going to proceed? And this is the theme that when I go to middle schools, or even higher, and sometimes even lower, into the lower grades, this is the theme that we like to explore together. What went on in Lucas's psyche? What went on in his life, materialistically, spiritually, etc., that drove him to where he was? And what do we do to make harmony in our life?
That's powerful. That's powerful. And Dr. Anthony, we're going to talk more about this, because I do like the concept of the art as the bridge, bridging that connection. I really like also about when we do make mistakes and we do find ourselves in a tumultuous situation, to be able to find the courage and stamina to proceed. And I think that's one of the things that, right what he just said is key, because I think that many of us have found ourselves in situations. Many of us are needing that courage. We're needing that motivation. We're needing that discipline to focus and to refocus our life. When we return, we'll be talking more about navigating the challenges, just from the pandemic alone. We got a lot of things to talk about that, and I'm sure that Dr. Manna can help us understand that as well. But I think that for all you listeners out there, it's like, if you're in a situation, it's about finding that courage. It's about finding the stamina and the motivation to continue, because that's all that matters. That's all that matters. And we're going to figure out how to do that later on in the hour. Dan Nelson will be joining us. Can't wait for that as well. So stay tuned. We'll be talking more about Lucas and the Game of Chance, how this connects with your life, things that you can take away from this, and then also how to find the book and how to also get a copy of the book for yourself. So stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shades.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Joining me here live is Anthony Manna. Dr. Manna has written the latest book, Loukas and the Game of Chance. And Dr. Manna, right before the break, we were talking about the concept of when we make mistakes, we have to find the courage and stamina to proceed. And I think that is so important. How do you feel? Because I like the fact of the book where we're actually creating our own destiny. We're not waiting for destiny to decide where we're going to go or what we're going to do. I like how, Lucas goes out and finds destiny, which is we need to create our own reality. But how do we find the courage? How do we muster the stamina to overcome a mistake that we've made?
Well, I think I mean, there are so many ways of doing this. I mean, some of your listeners would probably say the first thing we do is pray, and we pray for guidance, and I mean, and I consider, I'm maybe not considering myself a very religious person, but I'm considering myself a spiritual person, and therefore what I will do is I will go into a state of meditation, a state of quietude, and look for ways for me to face head on, what is the problem? Where do I stand? What can lead me to some kind of illumination? And as I say, my sister goes to a Catholic Mass every single day of her life because that's where she receives the direction she needs. Someone else goes to the synagogue. Someone else goes to a Buddhist meeting, a sangha, and so I think we find ways, if we're open enough, rather than running away. If there's anything I've learned in my old age is don't run away. Whatever is there, face it full-fledged on and give it your all and take a look at it and say, I remember once a therapist said to me, just simply say, I'm really feeling fearful about standing up in that classroom in that university right now. I don't want to do it. I'm very afraid of it, and it was like, wow, thank you. And I mean, it sounds so simple when I'm talking about it, but I mean, to me, it was like such an illumination that I didn't have to go and drink a glass of wine or whatever it was. I could just stay right there and say, this is what's going on in my life, and how am I going to deal with it?
I agree with you. You're right, and sometimes it can be so simple. I think the simplest things are obviously the most profound. But you're right. What about the children now? We have a few minutes, but what about the children now with the pandemic? I think that not being able to go to school and being stuck at home and being online educating and the fear of not seeing your friends again and kind of being isolated. How are some ways that they can begin to navigate that with obviously courage, but I think also one of it's mindfulness, like trying to focus on the here and now, not focusing on how far down the road it's going to be.
Exactly, and I think, obviously, because I'm a literature person, the first thing I'm going to do with kids is, and with parents, I'm going to say, look, let's look for some books. And, wow, if you go to Amazon.com and start looking around for COVID-19 books for kids and teens, you will find a wealth. And you will find... And also you'll be able to distinguish between those that are really good and those that are mediocre. And, and you can just read the reviews. But, I mean, I found one, COVID-19 for Kids, Understanding the Coronavirus and How to Stay Healthy by Catherine Chuang. And, I want to start there with the facts. I want kids to sit down with me. And I've been talking to a lot of teachers. I'm in a book... a book club with teachers, and I keep asking them, well, what are you doing? How are you dealing with this? Because some of them are going back to very restrictive school situations, and they said, we've got to talk about it. We need to get these kids to know what is COVID-19, and is there any possibility.
That's great. Dr. Manna, we'll be back. We'll be talking more about that, some resources we can use and some options we have and how to get the word out. Good information. So stay tuned. We got a great show still left for y'all. Tidbits of information and nuggets of wisdom. Live your true life perspectives with me, Ashley Burgess. We'll be back in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on Perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. Welcome back, guys. Good to have you here on the show. And joining me live, Anthony Manna. Dr. Manna has written his latest book, Loukas and the Game of Chance. Later on, Dan Nelson will join us here later on in this segment, our resident genealogist and historian, to give us some really cool history lessons and how it connects with what we're talking about in today's show. But, Dr. Manna, so, right before the break, we were talking about, kids facing COVID and dealing with COVID and how to really deal with these changes and challenges. What are some other ideas that you had? Because I know that, there's a lot of folks that are listening to the show, whether you're listening on 1160 or you're listening on another station on the USA radio networks. I think that a lot of us are, it's unprecedented. We don't know exactly what to tell our kids or what to do. What is some advice that you have?
Well, I think, if we could step back a little bit, we have to realize that the pandemic has curtailed many kids' access to books. And another aspect of books that they love so much is author visits. This is, when an author like myself will go into a school and direct a program, present a program, and, be with kids and talk about the book and talk about, their life as a writer. And so I think that we need to, alert ourselves, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, that parents are looking everywhere right now for, ways to, keep kids occupied, but in a very, in a good way in terms of their own growth in learning. But I would suggest that, for resources, for ebooks and virtual author visits, and a lot of activities for learning and enjoyment, that they go, well, first of all, start off at my website, which is www.anthonymannabooks.com, and that's M-A-N-N-A, and you'll find games and activities, and especially for Loukas and the Game of Chance, there's a whole section on my website, which is pre-reading, post-reading, and looking at the, theme, et cetera. So there's a lot of information there, and the website also offers children and tweens and teens materials on books of all kinds, picture books, fantasy, adventure, realistic fiction, and it just goes on. So I think that there are also author interviews. Some of the favorite children's authors and young adult authors writing right now I've been interviewing them, and it's on the website. But also, I would urge parents to go to some of the major publishing companies like Simon & Schuster and Macmillan. Those two, and all of them, they all have online learning programs, that I would suggest. But I think also knowing that I was totally amazed when I started doing research into coronavirus or COVID-19 books for kids and teens. And speaking of teens, one that I became fascinated by is called Quarantine, Our New Normal. 9 teenagers share their experience of worldwide pandemic. It is a fascinating study because what it does is it gets teens to talk about what they are fearing, what they are afraid of, what they're looking forward to, how they are conducting themselves as they navigate through this very scary time. So then another thing that I would recommend, because, as a writer, when I go into schools and I give kids prompts to write, it's very encouraging to see their writing. It's sometimes hysterical, it's sometimes very moving, very sad, but they like to write. And so I would suggest that we talk to them about their feelings, what they're missing, what they're hoping for. And the guide, I have 2 guides here that I would recommend. One is called Rip the Page, Adventures in Creative Writing, and it's by Karen Benke, that's B-E-N-K-E. And then the one I believe that one is for ages 7 and up. And then for the older kids, she has a book called Leap Right In, and that's W-R-I-T-E, Leap Right In, Adventures in Creative Writing. And what's so good about those books is, first of all, they look good. They're really visually, stunning. They're just so upbeat. And her attitude is, I'm going to leave you a lot of blank pages, but I'm going to give you prompts. And so when I was working through it, I thought, I want to do that one. It's like about relationships or about, what our fears are, or, and she comes at it in a very, very unique way. So those are some resources that I would highly recommend, because I think, you can provide children and teens and tweens a lot of comfort by writing and reading.
That's so true. And one thing I want to tackle before Dan comes on is I want to bring up the fact that the love of the bond between Loukas and the snake in the book, and how I feel like it really connected with the love and the kindness to animals into our environment. Do you, in your stories, do you weave that in as well in most stories, or is this specific about the animal respect in this story?
Well, I think one thing that I learned when I was in Greece and I was doing research into Greek tales and Greek fairy tales and folk tales is that yes, animals appear quite frequently, and they are treated very kindly, and it's such a nice place to be for me, because if I'm going to take a story like, let's say, the snake tree, which is the folk tale that I read that led me to Loukas and the Game of Chance. By that I mean I reimagined that story. I added characters, I added plot, I added conflict, etc. But there was that snake tree, and there was that snake, and that snake is in that story, that snake is very benign, and very giving, very altruistic. When I was looking for snakes to be with Loukas, I wanted to find one that is non-venomous, and so I researched, and there I found on Aegean Islands there is that snake that is non-venomous, and that people look at as a good luck charm almost, that comes into their home and into the village. And I thought, oh, that's the one I want, And so cool. I was able to introduce that into the narrative in a very natural way, because Loukas and his friends would look for those kinds of snakes in the hills when they would go out walking or playing or whatever they were doing.
That's really awesome. That's awesome. And Dr. Manna, we're going to talk more about this. And in just in a minute, I want to talk with you about your golden nuggets of wisdom. But right now, let's move over to Dan Nelson. He is our resident historian, our resident genealogist. He exposes historical information. And today what's really great is he's connecting directly with Dr. Manna in the fact that we're talking about not giving up, having the courage to continue no matter what. In this situation, we're talking about the courage to create one's own destiny. And Dan's historical information that he's going to provide for us today, it's a little different, but it's also about not giving up. Dan Nelson, great to have you live on Live Your True Life Perspectives. How are you doing today?
Doing great, actually. Hoping this is our last 100-plus degree weekend.
Me too. It is really hot. It is blazing outside. It is blazing, but let's see what happens. They said it's supposed to get better here in just a few days, but we'll find out, I'm sure.
Yeah. So our story today is exactly as you said, about not giving up. It's a story about a son and a father, and the son's name is Billy Rowlett. His dad was Daniel Rowlett, and just for those of you that have connections in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, Rowlett Creek and subsequently the city of Rowlett was named for his great-uncle Daniel Owen Rowlett. So this is a story about how the Civil War impacted their family. So Daniel marries a gal named Margaret, and they end up having Billy as their son. And they're just hanging out farming in Oregon County, Missouri, which is on the western side of Missouri near the Kansas border along the Missouri River. Well, Civil War breaks out, and Missouri was a state that was painfully torn between South and North. And Daniel enlists in the Confederate Army, actually serving under his cousin, John Woodside. And we'll talk a little bit more about John Woodside. So Daniel, did well in terms of the Army in the sense that he was appointed a wagon master, and then he became a sergeant, and then a regimental sergeant. So some good, leadership qualities. This unit he was in fought at the Battle of Shiloh, and then they ended up being in the long, drawn-out Confederate Army of Tennessee's campaign in Atlanta against Sherman and so forth. So then we get into a little bit of the family legend, but supposedly he was captured at Dover, Kentucky by the Federals, which was a sort of fortified area there, and they escaped, him and some friends, by swimming the Cumberland River. And if you've ever been to Nashville, the Cumberland River flows through it. It's a big river. It's not by any means, it's not Rowlett Creek. And he was a strong swimmer, so he got across it, but he got to a sandbar, and he looked back, and his friend was struggling, and so he began to curse at him to swim, and the friend made it to the sandbar. So once again, never give up, because he could have easily done that in the river there. So Daniel hid out in Weakley County, Tennessee, which is where Dover is, and then Foley worked his way back to where they were from in Missouri. So this is up the Mississippi River and across Missouri, and he gets there, and he can't find his wife, Margaret, and his son, Billy. And the neighbors say, yeah, the federal soldiers killed them. And in that part of Missouri, neighbors were killing neighbors. It wasn't just soldiers killing soldiers. And soldiers were also killing civilians. The South, was greatly destroyed at that point in time. So Daniel's pretty much destroyed. His family's gone. They were wiped out by the federal soldiers. So he figures, okay, well, I'll head back down to Tennessee, where I last was, and met some people. Well, it turned out what had happened is, yes, Margaret had died. His wife had passed away. But Billy was taken in by some neighbors named Muse, and the Muse family had heard that Daniel had died in the war, which, of course, wasn't true either. And that was really because there was a rumor about John Woodside and his platoon being killed, but it didn't happen to Daniel, didn't happen to John Woodside. So anyways, it was years before Billy found out somehow that Daniel was still alive, or that Daniel found out Billy was still alive. In the 1870 census, so 5 years after the Civil War ended, Billy was still living with the Muse family, now up by St. Louis in Jefferson, Missouri. So it was a long time before he found out they were living across the state from each other. So Daniel, in the meantime, had married into a family in Weakley, Tennessee, and married in. And it's a long ways from Jefferson, Missouri to Weakley, Tennessee, if you look at it on the map. But they kept working at it, and Billy showed up at Weakley, Tennessee, where they lived, and said, hey, I think I'm your son. Well, it's not like he had DNA tests back then, to check for paternity or anything. So Daniel says, well, maybe if you're my son, maybe you've got some of the same genes that I do. Probably didn't use the word genes back then, but has some of the same skills. And Daniel was a crack shot. He could actually shoot a hog across a river. So he gave a rifle to Billy and said, well, I'm a crack shot, so you should be skilled at shooting also. Well, it turns out that Billy did not inherit crack shot, just like we don't all inherit all the good things that both our parents can do. So that created a little bit of doubt, but then there was a test for Daniel because Billy was hanging out in front of a school at a gate, and there was the normal teenage fight between some boys over a girl, and somebody drew on him, and Billy drew, and even though he didn't have skills, apparently shot the guy, and so Billy had to split, so his dad gave him a mare, and he headed out to Indian Territory. So he stood up for his son in a critical moment. So that's sort of a legend of our Billy the Kid Rowlett, how he met up with his dad.
Wow, that's amazing. Dan, that is really interesting. At any time they could have given up, at any time, that you wouldn't have had the story, which is really so compelling.
It is, and it got passed down in the family so that I was able to record it when I did the Rowlett family history. So those legends are things that, are so precious in families, and you don't want to lose them. So we've captured that one so that you could all hear it today.
Well, I like this story. I love last week's story too, with being able to reconnect folks with, with the living, with the people that are still living, and reconnect that. That's powerful too. Obviously, back in the day, we didn't have DNA, but both powerful stories, Dan. Both powerful stories.
Yeah, I enjoy them both too, and it's actually one of the best things I get to do is help people find their family, find out who came before them, find out those cool stories, validate them.
Well, it's amazing, and Dan, I can't wait to see you next week on the show. I'm sure we got something. I'm sure you got something up your sleeve for next week, but it's going to be a lot of fun as well. So Dan will be back here, and I look forward to seeing you in studio next week.
I plan to be there.
Awesome. Awesome, Dan. Thank you so much. Dan Nelson, our resident historian and genealogist, really helps us to learn about our history, learn about where we came from, learn about these amazing stories that make history so interesting. I love history. That was one of my favorite subjects in school was history, to be quite honest with you. And I was great at history. I got A's in history. I was in honors history, actually, even advanced placement history. But we'll talk about that later on. When we return, Dr. Manna will be returning with us. We got a lot more to talk about, nuggets of wisdom. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shades.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. What a great show today. Dan Nelson was here, our genealogist, our resident historian, Dr. Anthony Manna, who just wrote Loukas and the Game of Chance, which is such a great book. Anthony, I've loved having you on the show. And one thing that I'd have to ask you, because I think that this tale and this story and all your work, and one of the things that you said to me the other day on the phone is you said it's a great privilege and a great responsibility to write books for children. And I think that resonated at my highest frequency. And coming from your perspective of telling these tales, of connecting, with children and young adults and adults and really helping them, what are some nuggets of wisdom at this time and place that we are right now, in this time and place that we need courage, in this time and place where we need motivation? What are some nuggets of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners here on Live Your True Life Perspectives?
Well, I think that for me, as I was saying before, I think the first thing is we need to talk to kids, and teens too. I mean, I think we have to sit down and talk about what is going on, and what the fears are, what the hope is, and just the idea that in the region of the world that I live in, kids are going back to school. And parents are very, very worried. Some parents that I've talked to are extremely worried, and people in my own family, my nephews and nieces who now have their children, and they're calling me and they're asking me for advice, and I'm saying I think the only thing I can say is get some books, get some good stories about people who survive, and survive the difficulties that they face, that they're forced to face. And then, as I mentioned before, if you go to Amazon.com and you look up children and COVID-19, teens, tweens, COVID-19, it's a wealth of possibility there. And then also, I think because I was so involved in a writing when I was still at university, I was involved in a national writing project where we brought teachers in and we brought kids in at times to discover what it is about writing that we can find out about ourselves and others, And I think that I mentioned Karen Banke's books, which, I think I would recommend highly, which are Rip the Page, Adventures in Creative Writing, and also for older kids, Leap Right In, Adventures in Creative Writing, because she opens up a door and says, here's something I'm going to ask you to do, and I think that becomes a writing prompt, and I think it creates a great deal of confidence that we can work through this together. I would love to see parents and kids, as teachers do, writing together, working together to iron out, to figure out what we might be doing and how we're going to survive.
It's so powerful. Dr. Manna, you can find Anthony's work. Just go to www.anthonymanna, M-A-N-N-A books, anthonymanna, M-A-N-N-A books.com. And you can also find where to find the book, his latest book, which we've been talking about, Loukas and the Game of Chance. I find that real quick, I think that right now more than ever we have to have courage. And the only way that kids are going to see courage is if parents demonstrate that courage. Even if you have to fake it to make it, it's time to do that. It's time to jump in there and say, okay, I know I can do this. I know I've had courage to overcome adversity in my past. I've had direct adversity. I have experienced direct adversity in my past, a lot of it. and I understand. And so it's like taking from that and thinking about some of the most powerful things that you've experienced. One of the things that I really love real quick is Harry Potter, when they ask him to think about one of the most powerful, positive emotional things that he can think of in order to deal with some of the negativities that he's dealing with. So come up with a thought, an image of you being powerful in real life, and use that when you feel that you're overwhelmed with adversity, and help that to make you more courageous with yourself and to expose that to your children. Dr. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on live to Live Your True Life Perspectives. You are a wealth of knowledge, and definitely want to have you back on the show.
Oh, well, Ashley, thank you so much. I love your show. I wish everyone the best of health and safety, and thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. And you got to pick up your book. Everybody's got to get this book, Loukas and the Game of Chance. You got to get it for your kids. It's a great book right now during this time, especially during COVID, overcoming COVID, going through this. It's a great book to allow them to also kind of escape a little bit in a positive, beautiful way. That's not really escaping. It's actually jumping in headfirst to what, life is all about. And that's what's so powerful. So just remember that no matter how scared you are, be courageous. You can do this. You can overcome this. We've done it before. We'll do it again. We'll be back next week. Be back next week with a great show, and you know that. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back. And, well, you know what? Wait a second. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.